Hello and welcome to another reading from A Glimpse of My Shorts. This one is going to be from the chapter of Shorts to Chill With and is entitled Do Not Go Gentle. So if you're sitting comfortably, have taken care of your bathroom break or whatever, we'll begin. The old man lay in his bed where he had been confined for years. He patiently looked out of the window that had been his only view in that time. He heard a shuffle and looked over to see his wife entering with a bowl of oatmeal and tea for his breakfast. He patted her hand as she laid the tray on his useless legs. "Thanks, lass," he croaked and took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. She sat beside him, moving a stack of books from bed to table. "John, you read more now than I have ever known you read in your life. I can't even make out what you're reading. They're in foreign languages." He cleared a few more off the bed and ate while they talked. "Well, Ethel, they're mostly Latin, but there's a few Spanish and Greek, and they haven't been much help with my problem, though." His wife took the finished tray and brought in a bowl and sponge for his bath. She went out and brought in a clean nightshirt. He struggled through the bath on his own and then wormed his way into the shirt. "Thomas will be stopping by today. That should cheer you up." He grinned and straightened himself up. The thought of his grandson visiting was always a cheerful one, and he looked forward to seeing the lad. He alternated looking out of the window in anticipation of the visit and in rereading the book of poetry he kept under his pillow. It was a thin book with only about 50 poems, but it was his favorite book of all. It opened automatically to the poem he had been reading over and over. "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage at the dying of the light." He read the lines again. He was raging at his impending death. That was the purpose of the books he had been ordering. Somewhere in all these had to be an answer. First answer was what happened when you died. Answer, too many answers, and they all conflicted. Second was, could you ensure the continuance of your soul? Answer, only one book had offered any solace. It was a book on soul transfer, and if it worked, a soul could be transferred into an inanimate object. You would have no control over the object, but would inhabit it for as long as it was intact. He looked around to see what would be a good object to put his spirit into. As he glanced at the shelf at the foot of his bed, he chanced to see Zip, his stuffed monkey he had kept since childhood. Remarkably, it was still in excellent shape. He had kept it that way, and it was his most cherished possession, bringing back many fond memories from his youth. He snapped upright at the sound of wheels on gravel outside. The sound of running feet told him of his grandson's arrival before he ever saw him. Thomas, aged 5, leapt into the bed and hugged his grandpa. The next 5 hours were spent in Thomas filling him in on everything going on in his life. School, his friends, his mom and dad. He stood on the bed and reached for Zip and held him the entire time he was there. It seemed Thomas had a soft spot for Zip, too. The visit was over too soon as Thomas lay over John's legs with his elbows on the window pane and his chin resting on his hands waiting to be picked up. His legs kicked and he hummed while he waited. John stroked his head, listening fondly to the humming. Suddenly he stiffened and felt his heart give a double thump, then stop. He breathed harshly and then felt the breathing become harder. Thomas jumped and grabbed John's face, peering into his eyes. "Grandpa! Grandpa's bad!" She came in and hustled him out. Calling an ambulance, she sat on the bed and held her husband. The closest ambulance was miles away, and they both knew it was never going to arrive in time. Precious seconds were passing. John mentally said the incantation he had memorized and felt his soul exit his body. He had been staring fixedly at Zip, laying on the corner of the bed where Thomas had dropped him. He could feel and see as the spirit entered the stuffed monkey. Outside the room, he could hear Thomas crying. John's wife picked up the monkey and brought it out to him. John's spirit now resided in the monkey his grandson held. He could feel the warmth of his grandson's arms around him. He could see out of the marble eyes and hear through the rubber ears. As the door to his old bedroom opened, he could see his body lying under a blanket that was pulled over his head. Grandma, grandson, and Zip all went outside. Ethel swung them on the porch swing while they waited for the ambulance to take John's body away. For the next few days, John's life was a magical transformation. Thomas brought Zip to show and tell, and John got a kick out of looking into the wide-eyed wonder as the children passed him from hand to hand. Everyone played with him at recess, and he swung on the swing, slid down the slide, and even bounced on a small trampoline. He enjoyed the feeling of sun and wind on his rubber face and nylon fur. At Thomas's home, Zip was placed on the table during meals and slept in the bed at night along with a cat, a dog, and a turtle. John gave no thought for the future. He was enjoying what his new life had to offer and wasn't going to think further than the next day. That next day was the day for his funeral. Thomas had redressed Zip in a small suit they had found at a thrift store. Thomas was thoroughly scrubbed and dressed and was waiting for his grandma to come and take him to the funeral. Thomas's dad and mom would meet them there. When Ethel came and put them carefully into the sheets, belted and safe, they drove the 7 miles to the funeral home. On the way, she told Thomas all the stories and adventures that Zip and John had had in their youth. John looked out from Zip's eyes at the front of the dashboard, which from his position was all he could see. At the funeral, Ethel continued to tell more stories to keep Thomas quiet during the service. Then it was time for a final viewing. Ethel held Thomas in her arms, and Thomas held Zip in his. They stood silently by the casket as people filed past. As the last person made their way back to their seat, Ethel leaned over and kissed John's lifeless head. The funeral director lowered John's head into the casket. Suddenly Thomas cried out, "Wait!" He squirmed to be let down. With a firm step, he stood up next to the casket and stood in the kneeling stool by John's head. "Grandpa," he said, as tears fell from his eyes, "you had Zip all your life and should keep him now, too." With that, he placed Zip on John's chest, and the director closed the lid. In the darkness, a mute monkey screamed. That's all for a glimpse of my shorts. Next week, when we do another reading, we'll be doing it from Time Is, the first book in the Time Is series, when Scott and Don visit Lepetamine. So until next week, thank you for visiting and thank you for joining me for another reading, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.